This is an odd one. But have you been affected by the decision to withdraw SMB version 1? So as at this point, you're probably thinking, first, what the hell is SMB 01 or 1.0? And secondly, why is John talking about it? And to be honest, most of you that watch the channel, this may not be an issue. But for some, it is going to be an issue. So, first, what is SMB? And why potentially might it affect you? Well, let's go SMB first. It stands for Server Message Block. Yes, I know, it's still meaningless. But what it is, it's a protocol that was developed to allow computers to exchange files. Okay, that's what it is. It's typically on a Windows-based machine uses SMB, although other machines will also use SMB when presented with a Windows file share, for argument's sake. So if you connect to that file location and the file moves backwards and forwards, things like patch information that you may store on your network attached storage, that may be affected by this SMB issue that I've just come across. Now, it's also deployed in other devices, potentially within studio equipment. So, for argument's sake, I operate a QNAP, network attached storage device, which is commonly known as a NAS, where I hold all things like disk images. So, for my floppy disk images, as you know, I have a policy of not using the original, so I always create an image of the disk and I use the image, and therefore if the disk goes corrupt, I just copy a new image down onto a new disk. So disk images, service and operator manuals for the equipment that I own or the equipment I've had to service for friends, etc. DAW files. I don't keep my DAW files on my Mac. They stay kind of on the Mac during the process of creativity, but once I finish with them, I then archive them off onto my QNAP. So I kind of use this for a number of different purposes, but you get the drift of what I'm getting at here. It's basically where you're storing things for long term. Now, you know, maybe you don't use a NAS, maybe you use I did have one floating around here, which I can't lay my hands on now. But maybe you use just a single hard drive that you plug into the side of your computer. I've given up using hard drives in that sort of fashion years ago. That's a different story, but from a resilience and redundancy basis, it didn't work. So that's what the problem is that SMB is used to run these services within your creative environment, your creative hub, should we say. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. So now that you know what SMB is, why is it an issue? Well, the background is quite simply, a couple of weeks ago, I received a message via my QNAP, because my QNAP has a habit of talking to me, that basically said that a NAS provider had an updated version of the operating system for my QNAP. Now, this probably happens about twice a year, if I'm honest. I get an email it always comes from the QNAP. It doesn't come from the people who make QNAP. It always comes from the QNAP, this message. And it basically says, you know, there's new apps available, there's app updates available, or there's new firmware or operating system available. And as I say, I've had my QNAP probably for about 12 years. I've expanded it because I originally started with 3 discs. And over the years and the content and video content I film, we're now up to, I started with 3 discs, I'm now up to 6 discs of 3 terabytes a pop. and I've archived some material off as well. So, but it's been upgraded. It's about 12 years old, and normally what I do is I just acknowledge the update and I click the install button when I'm not using the NAS. So things like, when I think about shutting down for the evening, I hit the install button then, and it can go off and do the upgrade. And I don't know, 20 minutes up to an hour later, I'll then get an email from my QNAP saying the update is complete. And that's kind of what I've done for, as I say, the last 12 years while I've owned this device. But then the fun and games started after this latest update. But I didn't spot it for a few days. Because both my Mac and my Windows 10 machine that I use probably on a daily basis didn't report any issues. It only came to light when I fired up one of my Windows XP machines. Now, when I fired up this XP machine, the idea was I needed to recover a disk image so I could burn it to disk. So I do that via Windows XP machine for various reasons. And there are a number of technical reasons, a number of software reasons why I use a Windows XP machine, but I've got two of them. And I spent an hour trying to do something, and then kind of sort of decided I couldn't be bothered. It wasn't critical, so I went and did something else, thinking I have some sort of credential issue. And it happens from time to time that the QNAP and the XP machine or whatever it happens gets out of sync with each other, and you just need to reset something. And typically it's on the Windows machine because the Windows service that does something has crashed. That's typically where the issue is, so a reboot of the Windows machine will normally sort it out. So that's what I thought was going to happen. I'll switch the machine off, go off and do something else, and then when I came back to it, the NAS would sort things out. So I decided to try and get to the root of the problem a couple of days later. And again, I tried to get this image because the guy I had promised the image to was sort of kind of getting into a space of, I really need to do something, this is kind of holding me up. So basically getting a little bit desperate. So again, I rebooted the whole thing, the machines, the authentication chain, and then I realised something else was at play here, because after rebooting everything and looking at the logs on my Windows XP machine, what I wasn't seeing was a service failure. So I'm sitting there thinking, right, okay, something else at play here. So coming from a computer background, which is the industry I work in the IT industry. So I started what I call the troubleshooting workflow, which is a chart that anybody who works in IT has probably seen. The first question that this chart or this workflow asks you is, did you bugger with it? Now, my first response to that question is no. And the reason why is all the machines that I operate, all the legacy machines I operate, are locked down. What does that mean? I have stopped them receiving updates so that I know that they're in a stable state. Because I don't want them to update. I don't want them to change because they work with all the things they're designed to work with. So there I'm sitting there saying, well, there's no updates. And in some of this legacy machine, there's no updates being pushed to them anymore as well. So that's even better. I haven't installed any new software on these on the particular XP box I was talking about. So the answer was, did I bugger about with it? No. And I was just about to move on to the next question. The next question says, did somebody else bugger around with it? Well, I think, hang on a minute. The NAS did an update. So the answer to the first question, yes, I did bugger about with it. And the troubleshooting guide states, you prat. You can't blame somebody else. That's a slight aside, but you kind of get the drift of where the troubleshooting flowchart goes. Of course I can't blame anyone else because it was me that buggered around with it. So at this point I go, Bugger. So, it looks like, given nothing else has changed, the issue is probably something to do with the change in the operating system on the NAS. So now, of course, I've now come up with a hypothesis, which is how you try to work with it. And you see me go through this sort of hypothesis type of questioning and answering session when I answer a lot of the questions on Mailbag. So my working theory is that the NAS operating system has buggered this up. I log onto the NAS. I enable the login relating to the storage device or relating to connecting to the storage device, because there's a number of logs on the NAS that you can instigate. So a little bit of Googling told me how to instigate this particular log. And my goal was to see if my XP machine was actually clearing the first hurdle and actually being able to log on to the machine when I was trying to create a Windows network connection to it. So after a little research, as I said, the login feature was enabled. I got my Mac, I connected my Mac, no problem. I got my Windows 10 machine, connected my Windows 10 machine, no problem. So I thought, okay, the NAS is still working. I could see the connections being authenticated in this connection log. Great, I was logging the right thing. Then I tried the Windows XP machine. Connection reported failed with a connection protocol error. Tried connecting my Muse receptor to it, which happened to be here. Same error reported. Okay, bit confused. So then I think, well, hang on a minute, this NAS can do FTP, which is a slightly different mechanism for connecting to it. I don't tend to use FTP, I tend to use Windows file shares. But I thought I'll enable FTP, so I went, found out how you enable FTP, enabled the FTP, and the Windows machine connecting was able to connect and access the files I was after. The Muse receptor was able to do likewise, as was my Mac, as was my Windows 10 machine. So I know it's able to connect using FTP and the credentials that have been set up to allow it to connect, but it wasn't connecting using the Windows mechanism. Now, the NAS is a Linux device. It basically runs a Linux operating system. It's got a little small processor in it that allows it to do other things as well as being just a pure file storage. To be honest, I don't use it for many of these other features. There's a few things I use on the NAS, but most of the time I use the NAS as a storage device. But you kind of get all the other stuff for free if you like. Anyway, the Linux device creates something called a Samba share. And Samba is a universal function for creating file shares, typically on Linux boxes. So it creates the file share environment. Then the NAS effectively exposes those file shares as Windows folders that allow you to log onto them using your computer's my Muse receptor and a couple of other boxes that can log onto the NAS to store and retrieve files. And when I enabled the FTP file transfer site, as I say, it was using the same credentials and it was working, but the Samba shares were not. Now I'm kind of homing in on what's going on here. We're starting to get to what's causing the issue. So I took the errors that were recorded in the QNAP error log and dropped them into a search, good old Google, and up come a result from QNAP stating that in its latest operating system upgrade, QNAP had taken it on themselves to disable SMB version 1.0, moving support to a later version of the protocol. So it will support 2.0, 2.1, 3.0, which are the latest supports of this SMB protocol. Now, the rationale provided by QNAP in their upgrade documentation was SMB1 has a security flaw, and in the interest of safety they've decided to disable it for everybody that uses their devices. Probably serves me right for not reading the upgrade documentation, doesn't it? Now, the Windows XP and the Linux operating system that's used to run the Muse receptor can't support SMB higher than 1.0, and thus they were not able to talk the same language to the NAS. Effectively, what a protocol is it's kind of like a language. It exchanges certain credentials in certain ways, or certain pieces of information in certain ways that either end understands. But they weren't speaking the same language, and therefore the NAS said, your name's not down, you're not coming in. In other words, it didn't work. So after having Googled and rebooted, I have re-enabled SMB 1.0 on my NAS, and all appears to be back to normal. Now, one of the things I should say is that I came across this issue a few years ago in my day job, relating to some very old server equipment where the security team had also decided to stop supporting SMB 1.0. And again, this old computer equipment had exactly the same issue, that nobody could log onto it once they took this universal decision to do that. Because what they did in typical security fashion is they disabled it and waited for everybody to scream. So the issue has probably been known about for a number of years. But, and that's the but. So I suppose we get to the end of this and you go, well, why are you telling me about this? Why do I need to know it? Well, if like me, you are running legacy computers because the manufacturers stopped supporting drivers or versions of keyboards or versions of equipment that you have running in your creative hub, studio, whatever it happens to be, basement, music making facility. If you find all of a sudden these legacy computers can't talk to a file share, and I know a lot of people who I correspond with operate a very similar situation to me. They operate either QNAP, Synologies, many other names out there of these kind of intelligent storage devices that have an operating system on, not just dumb hard drives that you would plug into the back of your laptop. These are sort of more network attached or Wi-Fi attached storage that you can use from several different computers. And that's the reason why I started using my QNAP in this way, is because, you know, I'm running a NAT, I'm running a Mac, I'm running a Windows PC. I mean, at the time it was probably a Windows 7 PC, it's now a Windows 10 PC. I'm running two XP machines because they have specific software loaded on them for dealing with disk images, dealing with loading software onto things like the 65M, loading software onto the Muse receptor, loading files on and off that from the NAS. You know, there are a number of things that I've got that effectively are talking to this central storage, and it makes far more sense to have a central storage environment than have to keep plugging disks in, or portable disk drives into the back of machines or into the front of machines. It just, for me, it makes no sense. Central device, lots of storage, jobs are good. But if you're going to perform an update, it looks like these manufacturers are now taking away this support for this vital protocol that these old machines that you've kept hanging around because they give you certain functionality, certain capabilities, the ability to interact with your instruments and equipment, may not work in the future as the manufacturers decide that they're no longer going to support these old protocols. So if you're scratching your head to try and work out what is going on, try looking at whether your machine has had its SMB 1.0 turned off. From my perspective, after many hours of research and realising that you're being protected from yourself, I have now switched the update feature on my QNAP off, which means that the QNAP is effectively getting to that stage where it's almost end of life, which is a shame because it's given me as I say, 10, 12 years of really good service in terms of what it does for me. You know, apart from I had a disk failure a few years back, but that disk failure wasn't actually the QNAP's problem. It was the fact that when I originally bought the QNAP, the company that sold me the QNAP and installed the 3 original disks that were in it installed the wrong disks. They weren't optimized for NAS storage. They were drives that should have been put into a caddy and plugged into a machine via USB. So they were the wrong disks to put into the QNAP, hence the reason why they failed. Once I replaced them with the right disks, everything has been hunky-dory ever since. I've not had an issue. So there you go. The story of SMB 1.0 really screwing up my studio. And on that note, live long and prosper. Bye-bye.